Afternoon, Tim. How you doing?
Afternoon, Shabbar. I'm very well. How are you?
I'm really good. It's been a while since our last conversation.
No, it hasn't.
It
It's been
hasn't.
10 minutes.
This is a
Don't lie to our dear listeners.
this is a back-to-back part 2 continuation of the conversation we had on spending. So, kick us off with a quick recap of what we covered last week.
I will. And I'm just thinking the reason we're doing a double header, recording 2 in one go, is because you are spending some of your money on a lovely trip to the Himalayas, aren't you?
I am indeed.
Which is wonderful. And I know that you have been looking forward to this for a long time and you couldn't go last year because of an injury.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about, if you like, life-centered or conscious spending, or spending that might be driven by what will people think of us, or what do we think this will mean about us, or some indirect thing. That's really what we were talking about last week. I think your wish to be in the mountains and walk and do all of that seems to me a real life-centered spending decision. Is that true?
It is. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally life-centered. I think it's just been, people say bucket list and, all of that. But I think there's some truth to it. There are certain things that you just want to do for the pure love of experiencing them. And I'm so grateful that I'm having the chance to do it. And I was supposed to go last year and I did my back and so therefore couldn't go. And managed to rebook it. And my wife has kindly said, off you go and enjoy, which is lovely. And so she's holding the fort. 14th November, I'm off to the Himalayas for a 6-day trek with a few friends as well, which is even nicer to have some good company.
Mountains and things that we're doing for the pure love. So in a way we could end the episode there, right? Any of you, if you've got a lot of money or not much money or a bit of money, whatever discretionary money you have, whether it's 50p or 5 million, use that money in the direction of what there's a real love. Friends, mountains,
Sherpa,
but whatever it is for you, for other people, it might be totally, totally different. And as far as possible, and this is a recap from last week, try to untangle ourselves from all of this very unhelpful and unnecessary kind of social comparison, peer pressure about either what we, quotes, should spend money on or what spending money on something means in terms of comparison, status, and all of these other judgments. So that's what we talked about last week. And towards the end, we distinguished between what we called money-centered spending, which is really more about how much did this cost and what does it mean that I spent this money on flash car or flash clothes or whatever. And money-centered spending is where I'm much more wrapped up in it's extrinsic, right? The value or the pleasure isn't really internal. It's about what I think other people will make of it, what I think it means about me. It's not a direct experience. And then life-centered spending, which is you in the mountains with your friends, and for other people might be a fine glass of wine or just a day off to hang out with their kids or anything. It's where can I spend money that allows me in the moment, in the actual experience, to be doing something I love or that provides meaning, fulfillment, joy, etc. I think a little bit another way of defining that, I'm not sure it's quite the same, but psychologists talk about extrinsic motivators and intrinsic. In other words, what's kind of motivating inside, whether maybe no one knows about it, maybe it doesn't mean anything, maybe even other people think I'm crazy. But to me, this is great. This is interesting, exciting, fulfilling, etc. Whereas an extrinsic one might be something that I believe by having it, it will get me something, but it's not the direct motivator. So what we thought we would do today is talk in a way a bit more about typical scenarios of spending. Because last week when we started this spending series, you had just had that conversation about someone whose spending was, I think, quite out of control, yeah?
Yeah, well, the result of spending, I'm going to sort of reframe it with not sort of spending that was out of control, but an inability to recognize that their previous lifestyle couldn't be maintained and therefore they needed to budget a little bit, maybe cut back. And that was proving to be difficult. That adjustment of lifestyle expectation was proving to be the source of the issue, because previously they were okay, they could afford their lifestyle, but then circumstances changed, etc., And there was this friction around now, like, how do I tell the family that we can't maybe spend as much? We're going to have to rein it in. Business isn't doing well. There was a lot of heaviness around being able to do that. Understandably, 'cause I don't personally think that many people like to experience a drop, but then again, like we were saying, like what's tied up in that. So yeah, that was last week. The example that we had classed as sort of overspending, and then we looked at the underspending, the person who's got the money but can't seem to spend it and is still full of anxiety and fear, even though all the spreadsheets in the world and the financial planning tools all say that you're okay, go forth and spend, but there's still a reluctance and an inability to do that. Sometimes it can be like a psychological impact, anxiety, fear, or sometimes it's just also depriving them of things that they would love to do, like, going to the mountains.
Going to Nepal.
Yeah.
So what we thought this week is we dive in a little bit to unextreme views about spending, which is many of us, most people listening to this, let's assume we're doing all right. We can provide for our basic needs, which of course not everyone can, but let's assume most people listening, one way or another, there's some food on the table, there's shelter and warmth, I pay my bills, I do what's legal with my taxes, and then there's a certain amount of money left over, right? And we may have ideas, we have lots of money or not much, but there's some money that we could spend on, I think, what people like you call discretionary spending, or stuff that I want to spend it on, right? And I think it becomes a really interesting question then for anyone listening is like, well, what do I spend my money on? I have to make decisions between what do I save and what do I spend? That's one decision. And then with my spending, if you look at a typical personal family budget, there's a whole load of stuff about, well, do I buy really, really super quality food, but then I have less to spend on clothes, or do I buy super clothes and super food, but then I have less to spend on holidays? Or how do I allocate the money, energy, money resource I have in the direction that's most meaningful to me? So I guess, simply put, that's called budgeting, I guess, or spending
Yeah.
money.
Yeah. Spending money, but I guess we're looking at it through a different framework, because you can get pulled of spending money in areas where you feel like you should be or ought to be spending money based on, like we said, what do we think we're going to find in that spending on a certain thing? What do we believe people are going to say about us if we spend in a certain area? So I call it maybe like intentional spending.
Right. Yeah.
Or conscious budgeting is a term that I've played
Nice.
around with.
Yeah. And for me, because we're going to talk about a little exercise that you and I have both done and we both found helpful, I think it is conscious budgeting. It's even a little bit different to budgeting, because budgeting implies maybe every month or year I allocate certain money to certain things. But then there might be a sort of on the spur of the moment spending decision, right? Something comes and I go, oh, is it in my budget or not? Or do I want to spend on it or not? So it's linked to that. So I'm thinking of two steps. Maybe we talk about the exercise first, and then we can talk maybe about our experience of doing this exercise and what questions it throws up. What do you think about that?
Yeah. And before you do, just a quick example. So I remember a client just around budgeting being unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a client who plenty of discretionary income, and what we would consider to, at their stage of life, having more than enough, right? They're doing really well. And they were redoing their home, doing some home improvements, making it all nice and upgrading and this, that, the other. And she in her mind had put aside a certain budget for the living room or the general house expense. And the budget had been sort of exceeded, or it was approaching. And there was this dilemma now as to whether she could get the curtains that she wanted.
Because they'd gone over the home decoration budget.
Yes. And the reason when, we spoke about that, there was a genuine judgment that if you go over the budget, you're irresponsible, you're this, you're that.
Right.
And so that was a real example of sort of like unconscious budgeting in action, because there was a desire that to have the nice curtains to match everything else, but there was a feeling of guilt and suppression of just, okay, all right, we treating it lightly, right? We've gone over, but we could maybe sacrifice something along the way, or actually just our retirement plans aren't going to be derailed by the fact that we've spent a few £1,000s more on the nice curtains. And that's just classic example, and something that I've been susceptible to in the past as well. Like, no, this is the budget, and if we do not adhere to the budget, that means that, we are, or I am, not responsible with money, and this. So it's really fascinating when you catch yourself and catch other people. And relating back to what we were saying about money just being light, why does it have to be heavy? And budgeting feels heavy. Just naturally, the word budget, you tell most people, they're just like, oh my God, budgeting or spending consciously should be fun.
You're saying so much. It's making me think there's like 4 other episodes in here, Shabbar. This is great. I think it's great. And maybe there's a whole episode on budgets, actually, and budgeting. Let me respond briefly to the points you made, and then I think probably we'll go into this exercise. But I think you make some really great points. So spending is not the same as budgeting, but budgeting might help us with some spending decisions. And today I think we will focus on spending. Then the fascinating thing you noticed is with this client, they'd made a budget. They had, by all accounts, plenty of money for their retirement. They were spending some of it making the house very beautiful. Okay, let's hope that's life-centered. So I don't know, but I hope it will bring them joy and pleasure and really feel good to them what they're doing to their house, rather than other people will think we've got a posh house and aren't we doing well? Because for me, that would be the difference between life-centered spending on home decoration and money-centered. So let's hope it's happy money. Okay. And then they go over budget. And then that you can feel the tension, right? The life impulse, let's assume, is, but I love these curtains and I love to create a beautiful room, and this is really meaning for us at this stage in our lives. Bracket, doesn't matter who sees it or what they think about it. For us, this is meaningful. So there's a life impulse spend, yeah? And then there's a little, I call them edge figures, a little inner voice saying, no, if you go over budget, this means you're irresponsible. So as we explore always with the money work, it's very good to find those judgments, to notice them, and notice, if I do this with money, it means this. I'm successful, or I'm failure, or I'm stupid, I'm clever. In this case, I'm irresponsible. And it sounds like that person psychologically in their life has grown up and maybe lived most of their life very invested in being responsible, sensible, in control. So now they have attention, their soul or their love of beautiful houses or whatever wants to do the spending, and they can. It's not about the money, but the part of their identity that doesn't like to be irresponsible is stopping them. So the best thing they can do to spend happy money is to, we call it reclaim in this work, to recognize I am irresponsible. And it's okay. And that can free up, that can allow them to get past that inner voice, that boundary, and actually use their money in service of life. And this comes up a lot on the workshop. We call it the reclamation. I am irresponsible, and it's okay. I am reckless. I am stupid. Sometimes if we're very invested in our lives in not being those things, or being told we shouldn't be those things, one of the most creative and healthy things we can do is recognize we are reckless and irresponsible. And that can free things up. And that does relate to spending. So many of the people we talked about last week who have money but don't spend it's either for them about vulnerability and security, or it might be about being reckless. And all of those things can free people up to spend the money they have in happy ways. Yeah. So that's a big topic. Let me pause there and then we'll dive into spending. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly where that sort of conversation went down, was like helping with some reclamation. And it was clear that like what you said, that voice, that edge was clearly present. And it's kind of, I don't know, what you do? Are you sort of like traversing, or are you sort of stepping over the edge, or whatever it is, but you're essentially talking to it in a way, and kind of putting it to one side, or maybe embracing is
I think embracing is better.
Yeah, embracing it in a way, and that whole acceptance of both sides, right? We're not sort of complete until we've embraced, or we're not whole.
That's right.
Right. So yeah, all very interesting when it comes up, and it plays up with all of us. I think no one's immune from these edges and boundaries, because I think they're present in all of us.
It's part of having an identity that isn't the whole cosmos.
Yeah.
Which is most of us, unless we're Buddha or someone similar. We have an identity. We grow up thinking, I'm more like this, I'm not like that. And then the part that's not like us, or so we think, becomes unavailable. There's often a little voice telling us we shouldn't or can't or mustn't be that way. And it often gets tied up with money. And I like what you say about embracing. There's a whole load we could do, this whole series about how you work with these inner voices. But generally speaking, in all psychology, and I think in spirituality really, including those parts rather than fighting or trying to argue with them is all the way, it is the best way. So rather than think, no, I'd be irresponsible if I spent that money and I shouldn't, you just go, I am irresponsible
Yeah.
and it's okay.
You mentioned Buddha, and
Mm.
there was something that just crept out. So that sort of conversation around the art of spending with Morgan Housel and
We
Stephen
mentioned it
Bartlett.
last
Yeah, I
episode.
mentioned it
Yeah.
last week. I mean, that sort of prompted this. Oh, we should tackle this topic of spending. So he was caught in a bit of a dilemma where he was like, well, if you listen to the mystics, the sages, or the monks, they don't really want anything. So spending money is kind of, I don't know the exact Buddhist tradition, but when you become a monk within the Buddhist tradition, you kind of give up money, dealing with money, and even spending. And so he was just like, oh, is happiness, true happiness, contentment, is there a link with not spending or not wanting things? And that was really interesting. And that might be something that we just park for maybe next
I
week
think,
when.
my friend, I'd love to talk about that. My quick answer is the monastic tradition in Buddhism is only one way of following the tradition. And there are others that have a very different relationship to how you work with desire. They would maybe be considered sort of tantric approaches. Let's do a whole episode on
Oh,
that.
okay.
That would be awesome. Let's move on. Right. But this is in all the
Yeah.
ballpark of spending and how all of us constrain ourselves in different ways, or we allocate money in this way more or less consciously. So how do we navigate that, right? How do we navigate that, whether we have what we think of as a lot or a little? I came across a great exercise. I learned it on a course by a guy called Rich Litvin. I don't think it was his exercise, and I'll try and find out who actually created it. I found it very helpful, and I know you've done it, and I've offered it to groups when I do money work. And what it encourages you to do is become really clear about the areas of discretionary spending that are your priorities and the areas that are not your priorities. So there's an immediate link there to focusing on your intrinsic values. In other words, what to you brings you life, happiness, contentment, joy, fulfillment, and getting conscious about the stuff that maybe other people think you should spend money on, or that you might get some social approval. But if it ain't a big deal for you, it's not a high priority. So I really like it because it does several things. It helps you focus on what areas of life are your priorities. And therefore, when they come up, I've found I'm much more free to spend whatever money I do have on those areas. That's helpful. And we can maybe talk about our areas in a second. Even more helpful, maybe this says something about me, it really helps me feel relaxed about the areas of money, areas of life that I can't be asked to spend money on, even if other people think I should. So that kind of unhooks me from some of that social pressure. Or in my case, my children moaning about my car, because having a nice car is very, very low on my own priorities.
Which you've mentioned on several
Well, there we
occasions.
go. And I'm hoping one day my children will listen to the podcast and get the message. But it really does help you do that. And I can explain the exercise very simply.
Sort of like try and do it sort of as we go along to refresh my memory.
Okay.
So, yeah.
But we'll do it quite
Yeah,
quick.
yeah,
So I'm
quickly.
going to go do this very quickly, and people might want to, if they do it yourself, just pace it out or press pause. The first thing you do is you don't include spending that you basically have to do. So don't include bills, taxes, what I would call a basic food budget. The stuff that you know, whether you want to or not, you're going to have to spend each month or each year. Okay.
I think
That doesn't
the posh term is like non-discretionary.
non-discretionary spending, right? Now, even there, it's quite interesting because for some people, food is just basic food. And for other people, it becomes one of their discretionary spends, right? If you really love fine dining or cooking or organic food, what you might do is you say, well, this is my basic non-discretionary food budget.
Yeah.
But I'm going to choose to put really good quality food as one of my discretionary items. So there's no right or wrong way of doing this. And I think it requires a bit of time, probably take people 10, 15 minutes just to really think about it or write a list and then come back to it tomorrow. But what you want to do is write down a number of categories that are meaningful to you of areas where you can and do or could spend money, but you don't have to. So, for example, some people would put holidays, others would put experiences with my family that might include holidays. Some people would put food just in regular spending, others would put spending on really nice food. Some people would separate holidays and going out to concerts and theatres, others would put it all together. So it doesn't really matter as long as you know what are the different areas of your life that you're interested in. So off the top of my head, investing in my own learning and growth, I think I included meditation retreats and things in there, but you could separate them out. I put health and fitness, which included kind of massages and things like that. I included spending money on my house, but again, not fixing the roof when it leaks, because you have to do that, but buying nice furniture or nice things for my house, garden, and various other things, right? And then off the top of your head, Shabba, or maybe you've been thinking...
I've just been jotting down golf, separate to holidays and activities, and then fitness, date nights, clothes, children's experiences and activities, home decor. So those are the few things that I was just jotting down.
People would include maybe buying presents for people.
Oh, gifts.
All sorts of stuff, right? Maybe charitable donations, giving money away. You could include saving, or you could just say, actually, each month I'm going to save X amount, and that's just non-discretionary. Again, it's kind of up to you. So the point is you get all of these areas, and let's say most people get between 8 and 10, and you just need to know each one and know roughly what it equates to. And then the way I do this exercise, which draws on another kind of psychological decision-making process, you write each one on a piece of paper. I think it's more dramatic if you literally write each one on a Post-it note. You look at all 10 or all 8 and you go, right, one of these has to go. One of these you don't spend money on. And then you might do that quickly or take a while, but you scrunch that one up, throw it to one side. And that is, let's say you had 10, that is priority 10 out of 10. Then you look at the remaining 9 and you go, right, out of these 9, one has to go. And it might be quick, might be slow. You scrunch it up. That's your 9th priority. And you keep going. And there's something I think really good about doing it physically and viscerally and actually scrunching them up and seeing your collection of spending areas gradually get smaller. And eventually you end up with 5, 4, 3. And I think you can do it 2 ways. I think you can stop at 3 and say, these are my top 3 spending priorities. If you want to, you could even prioritize 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
But where you will end up is this. You will end up getting clear on what was 8, 9, and 10. So what were your least priority areas? And what was 1, 2, and 3? What were your most priority areas? And then what Rich Litvin says, which I like, is with your top 3, you spend money on them if you want to and if you can. And you don't feel guilty. You don't think I'm overspending. So if experiences with your family or developing your own learning or health or golf or whatever it is consciously one of your priorities because you've reflected on it and intrinsically you know that really gives you something in your life, not because you're keeping up with the Joneses or what people will think or what you think it means, but because you love it or it's meaningful to you. You spend money guilt-free on that. And similarly, if 8, 9, 10 are not your priorities, and like most of us, you haven't got endless amounts of money, right? So this is where the budgeting comes in. You say, well, I'm not going to spend much money on those areas in order to spend money on my priorities. And it's very simple, but I'd never heard anyone do it that way before.
Yeah.
And I found it very helpful. Over to you.
Really helpful. And for me, I'm sort of thinking about redoing it. I never did it with the Post-it notes. I think we did it in one of our sort of group sessions, and it was just writing out a list and then crossing off. Like right now, not as impactful as having them on a Post-it note and scrunching them up and throwing them away. I can feel like almost like if I had to like scrunch one up and throw it away, I can feel a bit of psychological tension around like not spending on one of these areas. More from but should I be spending, that?
Yeah.
Right. So I didn't include this in my list, but just for an example is like, I don't know whether this would be discretion, but saving for a new car, because I'm quite like forward planning. I almost feel like, well, at some point, like the car needs to be changed, but actually, like think about it. I've got a good car. I'd probably just chuck that one to the end, even though I know I kind of should be doing it because it's the sensible thing. But actually, if I was only I'm not going to say for a new car because I don't really care that much about cars. Similar to you, I like to have a car that's functioning and working and, is comfortable, but I'm not that obsessed about changing it every 3 or 4 years.
No.
And so that immediately gets cast aside. And then you've got sort of, for me, like things like retirement planning, like pension, right? And that's almost like, I might even have to throw that into that's sort of non-discretionary, really. That's almost like a must for me to contribute to that. So I'd probably not put that one down on the list in the first place. But it's a really good exercise. I recommend that everyone takes and do it with your partner. Each of you should do it because I think that way it highlights the areas of spending that are important to each of you. And in my working with sort of couples, more around the sort of money coaching stuff that I've done around budgeting, because I have done some sort of budgeting work with couples. One of the main areas of contention and friction in a relationship, I think, is around different values on spending.
Money values. Agree.
Yeah. And that can cause a real issue. And especially when there's maybe more of a dominant partner in terms of earning capacity, it almost feels like the person who earns more has more right to spend money where they want as well.
Well, that invokes that's about money and power. And that's another conversation.
That's another conversation.
Which we should have, because you're right, it does, but it doesn't have to. But even if partners were earning equally, or even if we could get past the power dynamic, I think you're right, because often we think we're arguing about money, but we're arguing about values.
Yeah.
Right? So we don't even know what we're arguing about. What we're really saying is, to me, this thing is important, and to you it's not, so you think we shouldn't spend our money. But that's not about, again, the number. That's about a different understanding. Yeah. So I agree. Great thing to do by yourself. Great thing to do as couples. Let me throw up a couple of reflections on that, and then I guess we're coming towards the end. The first thing is scrunching them up, the Post-it notes, and throwing them away is really dramatic and helpful because it makes you make a choice. That's the point. We're not saying you won't spend any money on the ones you throw away. We're not saying you won't spend money, you'd only spend money on the top 3. You will spend your money on all of these things because you said they're all important. But what we're doing is we're ranking the importance and saying, I can feel relaxed to spend less money on these, or not bother spending money if I don't have to on these. And I can feel relaxed to spend lots of money on these. So that kind of inner tension we often face about, well, I can afford it, but should I? Or starts to release itself because you go, actually, this is one of my values and this isn't. But it's not that you wouldn't spend money on all of them, potentially. And the other thing is, you're right. Every time you make a choice, when you do this exercise, you will notice it will throw up that, again, we talked about it, I think last time, that inner conversation of should I, or does it mean I would be sensible or irresponsible or this, that, or the other. What I would suggest is 2 things. One is try to focus on intrinsic value as much as possible. In other words, forget about the should. Forget about if your car collapses. Forget about what people will think or what they would value. What for you brings you life? Try and do it that way, which is not easy because, as we were discussing in the previous episode, we're very conditioned by what peers and society thinks. But see if you can. I think that's the real value. And then you can have a really lovely chat with your partner about, this is really important to me and this is really important to you. So what would our shared money values look like? But yeah, anytime I get should I be spending money on this, to me, that's not so much an intrinsic driver. I don't think you ask yourself, I should spend money on playing golf or going to the mountains. I think you go, well, of course I'd like to if I had it.
Yeah, I think that's I mean, for me, it throws up that whole, allocation of resource. I think there are some things that I should be doing. I think the should be doing comes up for a lot of people because there's going to be spending that lights you up, fills you with vitality and energy. And there's going to be spending that doesn't. I think that's just, putting money into your pension is quite boring. It's looking after your future self to a degree. And again, I know that we've spoken about this, and there can be people that are doing out of fear, and habitually their identity is tied up in the type of person that saves for retirement and this, that, the other. Whereas there could be someone doing it with a completely different attitude. So I think you could approach that, are there months where I feel like, well, rather than contributing to my pension, if that money could go towards a golf holiday, then
wouldn't that be interesting?
wouldn't that be interesting? But it's like, yeah, but is that, there could be reclamation work coming up with this. I feel like I don't even want to go there.
I can feel that. What I'd say, and we won't open it all up. I think people have got the general idea of the exercise, and it may throw up these questions. So I can see you grappling a bit with kind of present experience and maybe future investment. And maybe we do a whole episode on pensions. When I put high my values investing in my meditation practice, so I take extra time off work, I do meditation retreats. For me, it doesn't cost me a lot to do that, but there's an opportunity cost, if you like. I don't work full time. It's not that I love it. And I think people who do exercise, fitness, study, many things, it's not that it's particularly, well, it is really good, but in some way it's meaningful and it's an investment in my future. It's not quite right to say that, actually. But I think what I'm saying is there are many things we might do with the frame of investing in my happy, healthy future with our money that aren't just investing in a pension. So that, if I'm
Yeah.
spending money keeping myself fit, having beautiful experiences now, looking after my mind, body, soul, family, all of those have a payoff now and in the future. But anyway, I think what we're seeing in this exercise is it throws up a lot, which is great. And you can use all the techniques we've described on the podcast when those things get thrown up. But in very simple terms, for me, I would say it has helped me be more relaxed trying to get Arsenal tickets, take my boys to see Arsenal, which is incredibly difficult and quite expensive. But I just do it because I decided one of the things I want is just fun experiences with my kids. So I'm more relaxed spending money in that direction. I'm more relaxed taking time off work to meditate because I know that's really fantastic. And I'm much less worried about the state of my house or my car. That sounds really simple, but there's a certain sort of release or relaxation that goes now when I go to visit friends who've got maybe much nicer or posher houses. It's really okay. I enjoy their house. I think it's beautiful. If I had a lot more money, maybe I'd spend more money on mine, but it doesn't trouble me or mean anything about me that their sofas are much nicer than my own. And I think partly of that is that I'm just very clear that is not one of my main money values. How about you? Any reflections from when you've done
No,
that
but
exercise?
I think the house one is a really sort of energizing one for me, because I think coming back to status and competition and stuff, like houses are one of those things. Stephen Bartlett, again, I'm coming back to this. He was like, I had this really big mansion or big house. I can't remember where it was.
South Africa.
South
He was
Africa.
saying
And
in his podcast, yeah.
it was like a beautiful house, but he goes, when I was there on my own, I didn't want to even be there because it was, so it's almost like you don't know what the quality of the experience is of that person in that house, because it's not about the house, so even then it's a case of I'm happier in a 2-bedroom or 1-bedroom flat, with someone that I love than in a big empty mansion. So
yeah. And for some people, I do know some people, I'm thinking of one particular person I know in my family who's very artistic. She loves design. She loves light and space. It really matters to her. It really affects her. She delights in it. For her, it's very important that she spends money on creating a very, very nice space, but it's not to show off. It's not for
that's
what
it. Yeah.
in fact, other people go to house and might go and sort of go, oh my God, it's, totally white with nothing in it. But to her, I know it really matters.
Yeah.
So we may spend our money in any possible direction. The question is what for us is allowing our money to flow out in the world in ways that really enrich our life and the life of those very close to us.
Yeah. I think that might be a good place to end for today.
Great.
All
Thank
right,
you,
Tim.
Shabbar. I've noted down power and money and monks and money and all sorts of stuff. So no end of topics. And just to say to people listening, we love getting your questions. We're going to do a whole series quite soon on people's money questions, listeners' money questions. So if anything comes up for you, listening to our podcast or just in your own money and your own life, please do email us. I think our emails are on the notes of all the podcast places, aren't they? So do email. We'd love to hear from people. We're very friendly. And who knows, we might do a whole podcast episode on a question you asked, which would be great.
All right. I'll see you next time, Tim.
Cheers, Shabbat. See you soon. Bye-bye.